The ministers of economy and finance under Pedro Sanchez have been singled out for the government's multi-million bailout of Air Europa. Let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to a new edition of Medidas Cautelares. Attention, because former Minister of Economy Nadia Calviño and former Minister of Finance Maria Jesus Montero, both ministers in Pedro Sanchez's government, have just been singled out by Javier Hidalgo, who was CEO of Globalia, for the role they played in the Pedro Sanchez's government's multi-million bailout of the airline Air Europa. Let's get started. This information has just come to light right now at the Supreme Court, where I just got back from, and where a new session of the trial on the Coldo scheme has taken place. But first of all, remember to subscribe to the Medidas Cautelares channel to get the best judicial information, always exclusively here in this community. And let's put this information on screen now because it's important to mention that today Javier Hidalgo has testified as a witness in this trial of the Coldo case at the Supreme Court, and honestly, we've seen Javier Hidalgo being very defensive, answering with a lot of monosyllables, a lot of "I don't remember", a lot of "I'm not aware", and so on. Of course, he has denied the involvement of the Prime Minister's wife, Begoña Gómez, in the bailout of Air Europa. We already know that the two of them were very close friends, but in addition, Javier Hidalgo has pointed out, as I mentioned, Nadia Calviño and Maria Jesus Montero regarding the bailout of Air Europa. Let's go over the information about what has come out of this. The former CEO of Air Europa and son of the company's owner, Javier Hidalgo, has pointed to the heads of the Ministries of Economy and Finance during the COVID-19 pandemic, Nadia Calviño and Maria Jesus Montero, when asked about the Air Europa bailout. The airline received a bailout of 475 million euros during the pandemic. After Hidalgo placed his trust in businessman Victor de Aldama and his contacts in Pedro Sanchez's government, among whom stood out the then minister José Luis Ábalos and his advisor Coldo García. The bailout was granted by the State Industrial Holdings Company, SEPI, which is under the Ministry of Finance. Well, the businessman Javier Hidalgo explained during his testimony as a witness in the Supreme Court in the context of the trial in the Coldo case that those who were most involved in the loan were the Ministry of Economy and SEPI. In this way, Hidalgo has directly pointed to these agencies led by ministers Nadia Calviño and Maria Jesus Montero. Ultimately, SEPI depended on the latter, and SEPI did not have a president at that precise moment, since Vicente Fernández was forced to resign due to his alleged involvement in a corruption case. It should be noted that this was the statement from Javier Hidalgo, which for me certainly was the most interesting of today, from this new session of the trial at the Supreme Court. It must be said that Hidalgo has stated in court that Aldama was receiving about 10,000 euros a month from Air Europa because he was hired as an advisor, and that he also had contact with leaders from other ministries, including the Ministry of Economy. He has also denied the famous press release published by José Luis Ábalos' Ministry of Transport about the bailout of Air Europa before it was approved by the Council of Ministers, something that would have helped reassure the airline's investors. It should be noted that Javier Hidalgo has stated that for Air Europa, the only thing that mattered was a statement from SEPI certifying that the bailout was underway. Even so, he has denied any kind of quid pro quo with the Coldo network for that bailout. In fact, contrary to what was also stated as a witness in the Supreme Court by Carmen Pano's daughter, Leonor González, Hidalgo has denied that 500,000 euros were paid to this corrupt network for the granting of the bailout. According to Leonor González, this money was picked up at Hidalgo's own house by Aldama and Coldo García. In the same way, Javier Hidalgo has also emphasized that everything related to the bailout has followed the legal process when questioned about the possible involvement of the Prime Minister's wife, Begoña Gómez. Then there was a moment, for me the most important and interesting moment of Javier Hidalgo's statement, which was when he was questioned by Aldama's lawyer, José Antonio Choclán. At that moment, he did acknowledge that Aldama was working for Air Europa as an advisor. And also, he tried to recover a debt of about $200 million that the Maduro regime had incurred with the company. According to what Hidalgo stated, Aldama even negotiated compensation in kind for the Hidalgo family's company. Among them, they talked about payment in kind, about an airport in Venezuela, also about cryptocurrencies, about hotels, and Aldama's lawyer, Jose Antonio Choclan, also hinted that PDVSA oil might have been offered. PDVSA oil to reduce that $200 million debt that Nicolas Maduro's regime had incurred with the airline, with the company. There was also a very interesting moment when the lawyer Jose Antonio Choclan, Aldama's lawyer, directly asked Javier Hidalgo about the role Zapatero might have played in trying to recover that $200 million debt before the airline retained Aldama's services. And did Aldama's lawyer hint at anything? Indeed, before Aldama, Zapatero spent a few years trying to recover that debt, and he didn't succeed. And that's why Victor de Aldama was hired by the company. Because he had important connections, as we all know, with Maduro's number 2 at that time, Ciro Rodriguez, with the Venezuelan Minister of Tourism, and so on. And that's why Victor de Aldama himself was hired to try to recover that $200 million debt. Of course, it's certainly very striking. How has Javier Hidalgo tried in some way to downplay Ábalos' role in the Air Europa bailout, and yet he has singled them out? And he has put the spotlight on Nadia Calviño, who was the Minister of Economy, and María Jesús Montero, who was the Minister of Finance. I think that was very clear. It should be said that throughout this day, other people have also testified. For example, Ábalos' secretary at the Ministry of Transport, who has confirmed that indeed, in 13 official trips, Ábalos was accompanied by the famous Jessica Rodriguez. She made it very clear. Then the former Chief of Staff of the Minister of Industry, Reyes Maroto, also testified. Juan Ignacio Vidart admitted that there was a meeting at the Ministry of Industry where the famous granting of the license to the company Villafuelca was discussed. As you already know, this is the key company in the hydrocarbon scheme. The former Chief of Staff of Maroto has acknowledged that meeting, which took place at the ministry. Claudio Rivas, the businessman, was present, as well as Carmen Pano and so on, and he himself was there with 2 other officials from the Ministry of Industry and so on. And at that moment, it was also very striking that the former Chief of Staff of Maroto said that he didn't remember if this matter had been communicated to the Minister of Industry herself, Reyes Maroto, after the meeting. That is to say, he tried to protect Reyes Maroto, because no one would believe that he didn't inform the Minister of Industry herself, Reyes Maroto, after having that meeting. Anyway, those were some of the most relevant statements from today's trial in the Coldo case. But it should be said that tomorrow the hearings will continue, and among others, Maroto's Chief of Staff and Carlos Moreno, María Jesús Montero's Chief of Staff at the Treasury, are expected to appear, which could also be very interesting. Of course, where will you find updates? Right here on Medidas Cautelares. That's all for this edition. I hope you enjoyed it, and if so, you know you can leave your comments or become members at the chosen tier for less than €3 a month, or the supreme tier for less than €7 a month. And we're going to dedicate today's show to our latest member, who has joined as one of the chosen ones, and right now, let's see who it is. Say his name to dedicate it to him. Thank you for your effort, just like all the members of Medidas Cautelares who do their part, so that this community keeps moving forward. And it's Alberto Fido. So, Alberto, today's show is dedicated to you. And you already know that you can leave your comments as well as your questions, because now I also answer any questions you may have. And give it lots of likes, lots of thumbs up, because you know that right now YouTube really values that right now. That you like the videos, the content you see on Medidas Cautelares. As I always say, it's crucial that everyone gets this information because knowledge is power. See you soon.